Bob Crippen, Anna Fisher, Robert Hoot Gibson, Frederick Gregory, Henry Hank Hartsfield, Frederick Rick Hauk, Bruce McCandless II, Ron McNair, Story Musgrave, George Pinky Nelson, Ellison Onizuka, Judy Resnick, Sally Ride, Francis Dick Scobie, Ray Seddon, Mike Smith, James Ox Van Hoften. The Space Participants: Jake Garn, Greg Jarvis, Krista McAuliffe, Barbara Morgan, Bill Nelson. The Rogers Commission: William Rogers, Chairman; Neil Armstrong, Vice Chairman; Dr. Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize-winning physicist; General Donald Katina, U.S. Air Force, former head of Pentagon Shuttle Operations. Titles in January 1986, unless otherwise noted. Prologue. Flight Control Room 2, Johnson Space Center, Houston, January 28, 1986, 8:30 a.m. The coffee, as usual, was terrible. Bitter and thin, the color of tea, almost certainly undrinkable. He filled a cup anyway, returned to his console, and plugged in his headset. It promised to be a long morning. Steve Nesbitt had arrived at his office early, checking for the latest weather updates from the Cape before taking the short walk out past the duck ponds to Building 30, and up in the elevator to the third floor of Mission Control. But from what he'd already seen on TV, there was no way they would launch today. It was freezing down in Florida, and there were 2-foot icicles hanging from the gantry. Space Shuttle Mission 51L seemed sure to face yet another delay. Nesbitt had been with NASA Public Affairs for just over 5 years, and was there for the triumph of the first space shuttle launch in 1981, helping to respond to a clamor of press and media inquiries from all over the world. Since then, he had become chief commentator for Mission Control and delivered the live commentary from Houston on almost every one of the 24 shuttle flights. But he was still nervous. Responsibility for translating the bewildering patois of engineering jargon and acronyms spoken by NASA engineers and astronauts into language the public could understand began with the launch countdown commentary that boomed from the loudspeakers at Cape Canaveral. After that, once the count reached 0 and the spacecraft left the ground, everything that happened was on Nesbitt's watch. There was no script, and he knew his words went out live to anyone watching a launch on television, either on the 3 national networks, on the recently launched cable channel CNN, or over NASA's own dedicated satellite feed. He relied instead on his Ascent Events list, which mapped a series of milestones the shuttle would pass on its way to orbit, from the slow roll it would execute as it roared away from the launch pad to the moment its main engines cut out at the edge of space. The hushed environment of the flight control room had been devised to concentrate the minds of each of the flight controllers on their own tasks, and only recently had a TV set been installed near the flight director's console to display images of the shuttle in flight. Nesbitt rarely had time to look at that, as he focused attention on the console in front of him. Here, he had access to real-time information about the spacecraft. On his headset, he could listen in to dozens of audio loops connecting groups of NASA engineers and flight controllers on the internal communications network. On a pair of black and white monitors, he could see telemetry data transmitted back to Earth from the shuttle, columns of numbers updated every second, describing any one of thousands of technical parameters of its performance in flight. With more than 70 feeds to choose from, Nesbitt had his regular preferences. Flight ops procedures, which included data on the shuttle's engine performance, and the trajectory display, which showed its speed, altitude, and downrange distance. Even with all this at his fingertips, Nesbitt found the live commentary nerve-wracking and practiced often. He took his duty of public service seriously and hated it when other commentators took flight with flowery language like Hollywood PR guys. He wanted to play it straight. And yet, suffering from the effects of a cold he'd picked up the day before, even as the final countdown began, Nesbitt would have welcomed another launch delay. His throat was sore, and he wasn't certain he could talk through the whole ascent without his voice straining or cracking. He waited in silence for his cue, for the shuttle engines and the giant solid rockets to light.